So where were we? Oh yeah. What's up, anatomy nerds? Welcome to Anatomy Bites, a show for physical therapy students and beyond, where we discuss different parts of the body in bite-sized little chunks. This podcast is for anyone interested in learning anatomy for medical professionals, including PTs, MDs, pre-health students, and more. Thank you for joining us. Let's get on with today's show. And remember, this show is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. Welcome back, nerds. We've made it back to another episode of Anatomy Bites. If you're new here, which, let's face it, it's been a while, so you probably are, I welcome you. And if you've been here before, it's great to be back with you. It's been a while. The last time I recorded, I was a newly minted, newly licensed physical therapist, fresh out of graduate school. I jumped straight from my final rotation to studying for boards, to graduating, to starting my very first job at a very busy outpatient clinic in the orthopedic setting, seeing up to 21 patients a day. So again, where were we? Today's episode is all about one of my favorite and also, as I'll discuss later, one of the most overemphasized muscle groups ever, the quadriceps. The quadriceps group includes the four knee extensor muscles on the front of the thigh. Quad means four, and ceps means head. So our quadriceps is a four-headed monster on the front of our thigh. It is the great extensor muscle of the knee, so large that it's basically considered as four muscles. However, as we will learn, they eventually form a quad pod and work together to extend or to straighten the knee. So let's dive into everyone's favorite part, those origins, insertions, innervations, and actions. The O's, the I's, and the A's.
Psst. Hey, you. Nerd.
Yeah, you. Before we get started, can I ask you a favor? Has Anatomy Bites helped deepen your understanding of the human body? Or helped you study for that lab practical that you were really struggling with? If so, would you mind helping us boost our rankings in your favorite podcast app? If you're feeling the love for Anatomy Bites and you want to share those good vibrations, can you please rate and subscribe to this show? It's super simple and it will help us a long way. If you're listening to this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, rating and leaving a comment is super quick and easy. All you need to do is scroll down from the main show page until you see ratings and reviews and tap those 5 little stars and leave a comment if you feel so inclined. If you're on Spotify from the main show page, just hit those 3 little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and select Rate Show from there. It's super easy, and doing this small kindness will help boost our rankings and help others find out about the show. So if you're feeling the love, hook us up. Thanks, and let's get on with it. The quadriceps.
Attachments. The quadriceps form a large fleshy mass that covers the front and sides of the femur. It is subdivided into separate portions, each with distinctive names. One, occupying the middle of the thigh and connected above with the ilium, is called the rectus femoris, named for its straight course. The other 3 lie in immediate connection with the body of the femur, covering it from the trochanters to the condyles. The portion on the lateral side of the femur is termed the vastus lateralis. The one covering the medial side is the vastus medialis, and the one in front is the vastus intermedius. The rectus femoris is situated in the middle of the front of the thigh. It is fusiform in shape, with its superficial fibers arranged in a bipeniform manner while the deep fibers run straight down to the deep aponeurosis. It arises by two tendons, the anterior tendon from the anterior inferior iliac spine of the pelvis, and the posterior tendon from a groove above the brim of the acetabulum. These two tendons unite at an acute angle and spread into an aponeurosis, which extends downward on the anterior surface of the muscle. From this, the muscular fibers arise. The muscle ends in a broad and thick aponeurosis that occupies the lower two-thirds of its posterior surface. This narrows into a flattened tendon that inserts into the base of the patella. The vastus lateralis is the largest part of the quadriceps femoris. It arises from a broad aponeurosis of the proximal femur, which attaches to the upper part of the intertrochanteric line, the anterior and inferior borders of the greater trochanter, the lateral lip of the gluteal tuberosity, and the upper half of the lateral lip of the linea aspera. This aponeurosis covers the upper 3/4 of the muscle, with fibers originating from its deep surface. Additional fibers arise from the tendon of the gluteus maximus and the lateral intermuscular septum between the vastus lateralis and the short head of the biceps femoris. The fibers form a large fleshy mass that attaches to a strong aponeurosis on the deep surface of the lower part of the muscle. This aponeurosis thickens into a flat tendon that inserts into the lateral border of the patella, blending with the quadriceps femoris tendon and contributing to the knee joint capsule. The vastus medialis and vastus intermedius appear to be inseparably united. However, when the rectus femoris is reflected, a narrow interval is observed extending upward from the medial border of the patella between the two muscles. They may be separated as far as the lower part of the intertrochanteric line, although they are often continuous. The vastus medialis arises from the lower half of the intertrochanteric line, the medial lip of the linea aspera, the upper part of the medial supracondylar line, the tendons of the adductor longus and adductor magnus, and the medial intermuscular septum. Its fibers run downward and forward, attaching to an aponeurosis on the deep surface of the muscle. This aponeurosis inserts into the medial border of the patella and the quadriceps femoris tendon, with an expansion extending to the knee joint capsule. Note that some clinical contexts may also refer to an obliquely oriented section of this muscle as the vastus medialis obliquus. This, however, is not considered to be anatomically separate from the rest of vastus medialis. The vastus intermedius arises from the front and lateral surfaces of the femur in its upper two-thirds and the lower part of the lateral intermuscular septum. Its fibers end in a superficial aponeurosis forming the deep part of the quadriceps femoris tendon. The tendons of the different portions of the quadriceps unite at the lower part of the thigh, forming a single strong tendon that inserts into the base of the patella. This is often referred to simply as the quadriceps tendon. Some fibers extend over the patella, blending with the patellar tendon. The patella itself is a sesamoid bone developed within the quadriceps tendon on the proximal side and the patellar tendon distally. The patellar tendon, which extends from the apex of the patella to the tibial tuberosity, functions as the proper tendon of insertion for the quadriceps. The medial and lateral patellar retinacula are expansions from its borders. Nerve supply. The quadriceps muscles are innervated by the second, third, and fourth lumbar nerves via the femoral nerve, or segments L1, L2, and L3. Actions. The quadriceps femoris extend or straighten the knee joint. The rectus femoris is a dual joint muscle and assists the psoas major and iliacus in supporting the pelvis and trunk on the femur. It also contributes to flexing the thigh on the pelvis, or, if the thigh is fixed, flexing the pelvis. The vastus medialis draws the patella medially as well as upward, although this is a smaller action and may not be covered in some anatomy programs.
So there we have the attachments, innervations, and actions of the quadriceps. Essentially, they're all knee extensors plus one hip flexor, the rectus femoris, who's doing double duty. And if you want more detail on rectus femoris itself, we covered it in quite a bit of detail long ago in episode 7 of season 2 called Rectus Femoris and the L-Spine Blues. Earlier on today, I made mention that the quads are one of my favorite muscle groups, and we'll go over why in a moment. But I also made mention that they're, one of the more overrated or overemphasized muscle groups. Like, there's so many other cool ones, but we'll go over why that is as well. First, let's go over why they're a favorite. If you've ever watched velodrome or track cycling, you have seen the quadriceps in action. I mean, you could probably see them like a mile away if you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, head on over, do a Google search, and search for velodrome or track cyclist. You will see what I'm talking about. The quads also tend to be well developed in competitive soccer players and speed skaters. You know, like my good old friend, childhood crush, Apollo Anton Ohno. Ohno, anyone? Oh, yes. Now, I'm a soccer player and a cyclist, so I tend to rely on my quads quite a bit. They're easy to train, they look nice when they're strong, and even in my experience with older patients, they tend to be one of the stronger muscle groups in manual muscle testing. But as a youth athlete, I also suffered an ACL tear or anterior cruciate ligament tear, partially, I believe, as a result of overtraining my quads at the expense of undertraining everything else. And this is kind of where I'm getting into that whole the quads are overrated thing. So let's talk more about that. The quads are opposed by the hamstrings on the posterior aspect of the femur. A good balance between your hamstrings and your quads is actually a protective criterion against ACL injuries like the one I had. It's called the HQ ratio, or the hamstrings quadriceps ratio. In isokinetic testing, the more balanced the ratio is between the strength of these two muscle groups, the better outcomes tend to correlate with prevention of ACL tears. Kind of crazy, right? And so this, in my opinion, is kind of where I went wrong as a youth athlete, where I tended to train my quads way more than I paid attention to anything else. Okay, so I was inexperienced in the weight room, and I made the mistake that many inexperienced weight trainers do, which is train what's easy and kind of ignore everything else. I don't know, I've always kind of hated training my hamstrings. Like, first of all, you can't really see them, and I didn't like having to lay in that prone position on my stomach to do that knee flexion exercise. I don't know, it just felt kind of awkward, right? And I didn't really have the tools to learn how to do things with barbells. You know, we just weren't there in the 1990s, okay? So I didn't like training my hamstrings. I didn't know how to train my glutes or even like why that was important, but I did love to train my quads. So also having other risk factors like being a female and playing soccer, a pivoting sport, I was already, playing with a little bit of fire. So soccer players, especially if you're female, listen up. Train that posterior chain, okay? Do not ignore your hamstrings. Do not ignore your glutes. Yes, train your quads, but make sure you're training everything else. And that way you'll be able to hopefully prevent catastrophe, or at least give yourself a leg ahead. Now, for what it's worth, I do want to take a moment to mention another condition where the quadriceps are pivotal. And this is where we need to discuss polio. Okay? So polio affects the quadriceps. It essentially causes paralysis of the quadriceps, which results in gait and balance disturbances, which can lead to disability. So for those of you who don't know, people who have suffered polio, yes, they still exist. Okay? They are still around. Countries where polio vaccination has been available have largely seen reductions or near eradication of polio. But to this day, yes, even in the United States, I have a handful of patients with post-polio syndrome who were affected by the disease because for one reason or another, they did not have access to vaccination. And this is why vaccination for diseases like polio cannot be taken for granted. Vaccines are one of the great miracles of science. Yes, I said what I said. All right, nerds. It's great to be back after a couple years off, I have to say. Thanks for hanging in there for the long haul, and hello and welcome to all of you newbies out there. So what do you think of our friends, the Quad Pod? What muscles or structures do you want to hear about next? Feel free to let me know in the comments, or you can reach out to me on the socials at Nikki-Rae. Until next time, friends, stay hungry and stay curious. This show is written, produced, hosted, and recorded by Nikki-Rae Alkema, Doctor of Physical Therapy. Moral support and occasional snoring provided by the resident pit bulls, also known as the Itty Bitty Pity Committee, Vita and Zoe. Anatomy readings are sourced from the United States public domain text, Anatomy of the Human Body, 20th edition, by Henry Gray and Warren H. Lewis. Opinions and commentary are my own and do not represent any institution or professional affiliation. Lastly, this show is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice.